I slouched in my seat, my gaze drifting across the crowded venue. Laughter echoed, music pulsed, and the dance floor was alive with women enjoying their night. Joy was everywhere, yet none of it reached me. Out of all the people in the world, Marc Lavaliere had chosen my wife. Why? What made her say yes? What made her walk away from everything we built? Our children were nearly grown, on the brink of independence, and we had spent years discussing what life would look like once they left home. We had a vision, places we wanted to see, memories we wanted to create. A few months ago, I had wondered what our relationship would be like when it was just us again. I had assumed we'd grow even closer, rediscover the connection we had nurtured over the years. But now, as I sat there, the truth slammed into me with brutal clarity. Linda's future no longer had a place for me. I had been a fool. That realization burned away every ounce of sadness, leaving nothing but raw, simmering anger. The people around me must have sensed the shift, their glances filled with silent concern, as if expecting me to snap. D, ever the cautious one, leaned in, voice low and uncertain. "You good, Jim?" His words barely registered. My attention was fixed elsewhere, on a booth across the room where a group of young women sat, chatting and laughing, oblivious to my stare. Over D's shoulder, I studied them. Why hadn't Mark picked one of them instead? I stared for a long moment before something strange washed over me, an absurdity so overwhelming that it erupted from my chest in laughter, loud, uncontrollable laughter. The conversation at my table stopped. People turned in their seats. My laughter spread through the room, sharp and unexpected, until tears streamed down my face. My chest heaved as I gasped for breath, and when the laughter finally faded, I wiped my eyes and let out a long, steady exhale. Something had shifted. I wasn't a married man anymore. I had no obligation to care about Linda's feelings. She had made it clear that mine were no longer her concern. The table sat in stunned silence, eyes locked on me as if I had just shattered some unspoken rule. I met D's gaze, then slowly slipped off my wedding ring, turning it in the dim light before setting it in his open palm. "Give this to Linda when you see her," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I've got better things to do." Without another word, I stood, reached into my pocket, and tossed a $10 bill onto the table. "For my drink. Since you had no problem watching Linda betray me, you can cover the rest." I didn't wait for a response. As I walked away, voices called after me, but I ignored them. Stepping outside, I inhaled the crisp night air, my mind racing with a single thought. If Linda was going to enjoy her new life, then so was I. By the time I reached my hotel, my decision was made. I strode to the front desk, where a young receptionist looked up as I approached. "Do you have any luxury suites available?" I asked. She checked her system, then shook her head. "Only our honeymoon suite. It's got a king bed, jacuzzi, and a private balcony overlooking the city." I nodded. "I'll take it." She hesitated. "Just so you know, your original room won't be refunded this late at night." "That's fine," I said without missing a beat. "Leave it for my wife. I'll be in the suite." Her brow lifted slightly, curiosity flickering across her face. "I assumed you were booking something for the two of you?" I took the key card from her with a smirk. "If she asks for a key to my room, don't give her one. In fact, if she asks about me at all, tell her I checked out." A slow smile tugged at her lips. "Understood. I'll make sure the staff knows." I returned to my original room, packed my things, and left Linda's belongings exactly where they belonged, stuffed into the trash. The honeymoon suite was immaculate. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city skyline, and the jacuzzi on the private balcony glowed under soft lighting. I took a moment to appreciate the view before turning back inside. In my suitcase, the tuxedo I had packed for a romantic evening with Linda remained untouched. I pulled it out and slipped it on. After stopping by an ATM to withdraw cash, I headed back to the club. A long line stretched outside, but I ignored it and walked straight up to the bouncer. He raised a brow. "Something I can help you with?" I pulled out a crisp $100 bill and handed it over. His lips curled in amusement as he stepped aside. "Enjoy your night." Inside, my old friends were still at the same table, whispering amongst themselves. I barely spared them a glance as I scanned the room, looking for them. The four women at their booth near the dance floor, right where I had left them. Perfect. I strode over with confidence, stopping just short of their table. "What are four beautiful women doing here alone?" I asked, my tone smooth and inviting. The tallest brunette let out a drunken laugh. "We're not alone. We're here with our friend. Some idiot left her for a witch, so we're making sure she has a great night. I smirked. Mind if I help with that? The brunette exchanged a knowing look with the petite redhead beside her. After a brief moment, the redhead smiled and extended her hand toward me. I grasped it gently, guiding her as she stepped out of the booth. As we made our way to the dance floor, I leaned in slightly. "What should I call you?" "Samantha," she replied smoothly. "Jim," I introduced myself. "I have to ask, what kind of idiot would ever let go of someone like you?" She chuckled, her eyes flashing with amusement. "The kind that doesn't deserve me," I grinned. "Sounds about right." We swayed to the beat, chatting as we moved. She was in nursing school, working toward her degree, and had lived in this city her whole life. As the music shifted to a slower tempo, she stepped in closer. "Be honest, Jim," she said, her voice quieter now. "Are you married?" I met her gaze. "Not anymore." She studied my face, as if reading between the lines. "Was your wife the one dancing with Marc Lavalier earlier? I noticed she vanished right after that." My brow lifted. "You were paying attention?" She smirked. "Jim, the whole club saw it happen." I exhaled a short laugh. "Then I guess you figured out we split up the same moment I did." Her expression softened, and we continued dancing, neither of us speaking for a while. It felt good, just being close to someone, sharing a moment with no expectations. When the song ended, we made our way back to her table. Samantha turned to her friends. "So, we had a rule. No guys at our table tonight. But I want Jim to stay." The brunette smirked, clearly enjoying the opportunity to mess with her. "I don't know, Sam. Rules are rules." I flashed a grin. "What if I make it up to you with a few bottles of champagne?" She tapped her chin as if seriously considering it. Tempting, but not quite convincing," Samantha cut in before I could respond. "We saw Marc Lavalier leave, with his wife. That changed everything." 3 voices responded in unison. "Well, in that case..." The women scooted around, making space for Samantha and me. Before I could even ask their names, the blonde seated closest to Samantha turned to me with a raised brow. "So be honest, do you and your wife have an open marriage?" "Not even close." Another blonde leaned forward, intrigued. "Then what did she tell you?" I scoffed. "Nothing. She claimed she was going to the restroom, but actually slipped out the back with Mark." I gestured over my shoulder without bothering to look, and my so-called friends covered for her. Right then, the waitress arrived. I glanced at the women. "Tell me, does everyone here like champagne?" Their faces lit up, nodding enthusiastically. "2 bottles of your finest," I told the waitress. Excited cheers erupted from the group as they clapped and laughed. Before the conversation could veer back into my personal life, I properly introduced myself. The brunette was Christy, and the 2 blondes were Kim and Susan. Turns out, they were all in nursing school with Samantha. When the champagne arrived, we clinked glasses, taking generous sips. Christy tilted her head and studied me. "So, what's your plan now? About your wife, I mean." I leaned back, unfazed. "As far as I'm concerned, she made the decision for me when she walked out that door." Kim's expression shifted. "Do you have kids?" I sighed. "Yeah, a 15-year-old boy and a 13-year-old girl, but they're growing up fast. In a few years, they'll have their own lives, and I'll be free to do things differently." Samantha grinned, looping her arm through mine as she raised her glass. "Screw it, tonight you're with me." Glasses clinked again, and the laughter flowed as freely as the drinks. We swapped stories, shared jokes, and danced until our feet ached. The girls took turns dancing with different people, even with each other, but Samantha never strayed far from me. She kept close, as if silently staking her claim. Toward the end of the night, Christy suddenly shot up from her seat, her expression dark with anger. Without hesitation, she stormed off. The rest of us turned to follow her path, quickly realizing she was headed straight for my ex-friend's table. Before Dee could even reach me, Christy intercepted her. The confrontation was immediate. Sharp words exchanged, Christy's finger jabbing into Dee's chest as she spoke with heated intensity. Dee's expression crumbled under the weight of it, her face falling until she broke down completely. She collapsed into her seat, tears spilling down her cheeks. Christy wasn't finished. She turned to the rest of the table, tearing into them one by one, and the surrounding tables erupted in laughter as my former friends sat there, completely humiliated. When Christy returned, Kim and Susan greeted her with high fives. She took a long sip of champagne, smirked, and shot me a victorious look. "None of those losers are coming near this table for the rest of the night." I glanced over at them. They were already gathering their things, avoiding my gaze entirely. Jane and Dee were both crying, and not a single one of them had the nerve to look in my direction. "What exactly did you say to them?" I asked, impressed. She crossed her arms, clearly satisfied. "That woman finally got the guts to come talk to you, so I shut her down. And I made sure every single one of them knew exactly how I feel about people who help cheaters." I smirked. "Well, you certainly left an impression. They wanted me to forgive Linda just so they wouldn't have to feel bad about their own choices." I leaned in slightly. "And for that, I owe you a kiss." Before I could make a move, Samantha grabbed my face, her eyes glinting with mischief. "Oh, no, you don't," she teased. Then she pulled me in and kissed me hard. The other women erupted into cheers, clapping and laughing. Kim rolled her eyes playfully. "Get a room, you two." I grinned. "Funny you say that. I actually have a suite just down the block. And judging by the amount you've all had to drink, none of you should be driving." Kim, Christy, and Susan exchanged glances before bursting into laughter. "Champagne in a honeymoon suite," Kim said. "Now that sounds like an ending to this night." After settling the bill, we stepped out into the cool night air. Samantha clung to my arm while the other three walked together, giggling and leaning on one another for support. At the hotel reception, I placed an order for more champagne to be sent to my room. When I mentioned it was a honeymoon suite, all four of them broke into laughter. As the elevator doors slid shut, Kim, Christy, and Susan erupted into a theatrical version of the wedding march, their offbeat harmonies filling the space. Samantha groaned, covering her face with one hand while gripping my arm tighter with the other. By the time we reached the suite, their laughter had only grown louder. "Tradition says the groom carries the bride inside," Kim teased, winking. Samantha turned her eyes up to me, hesitant but hopeful. "You don't have to." I smirked, nudged the door open, and without another word swept her off her feet. She gasped before bursting into laughter, arms instinctively wrapping around my neck as I carried her inside. The second we crossed the threshold, she pulled me into a deep kiss, fingers threading through my hair. The other girls, completely entertained, clapped and whistled, until Christy's attention shifted to the balcony. Before I could even set Samantha down, the three of them had already stripped to their underwear and climbed into the bubbling jacuzzi, giggling as they settled into the warm water. I finally placed Samantha on her feet, and she smiled, still holding my hand. A knock at the door signaled the arrival of the champagne. I grabbed the bottles and brought them over to the balcony, where the girls were already lounging, toasting one another with imaginary glasses. Susan glanced at me with an exaggerated pout. "You're entirely overdressed for the occasion," I chuckled. "I think I'll keep my suit on." They tried to convince Samantha to join them, but she just smirked, tugged me toward the bedroom, and shut the door behind us. The moment we disappeared, the muffled sound of the wedding march started up again, followed by uncontrollable laughter. Morning light filtered through the curtains, casting a golden glow across the room. Samantha was curled up beside me, her body warm and relaxed. But we weren't alone. 3 additional figures were sprawled across the massive bed, tangled in sheets, legs and arms carelessly draped over one another. I had no idea when they had slipped in, but there they were. Carefully, I slid out of bed, running a hand through my hair. Samantha stirred, blinking sleepily. I met her gaze with a small smile. She stretched, rubbing her eyes. "Regret anything?" she murmured. "Not a thing," I said. Her lips curled into a grin, and she reached for my hand. "Come shower with me." I let her pull me toward the bathroom. The second we stepped under the hot water, I lifted her against the wall, her legs tightening around me. The way she looked at me, hungry, wanting, ignited something deep in my chest. She fell apart in my arms twice before I finally let go. When we stepped out, the other girls were already awake, lounging in the suite with mimosas in hand. Christy stretched lazily on the couch. "Damn, if that was half as good as it sounded, I need that shower next." The others laughed, and Samantha and I exchanged a knowing glance. After everyone freshened up, the group said their goodbyes, all except Samantha. She brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, her voice soft. "Can you take me home?" On the drive, she leaned against me, fingers absent-mindedly tracing patterns on my arm. "You know," she murmured, "you could go back to your wife. But if you don't, I'd really like to see you again." I glanced at her, a slow smirk forming. "Going back isn't an option. Last night wasn't just fun. I actually enjoyed being with you." She beamed. "Then call me if you think this could be something real." At her doorstep, she kissed me, her lips lingering as if savoring the moment. Inside, Christy sat on the couch, waving with a knowing smirk before turning back to the TV. The drive home was quiet, but my thoughts were loud. I stepped inside the house, sinking into the darkness of my living room, the weight of reality pressing in. Then, headlights flashed through the window. A car pulled into the driveway. A key turned in the lock. "Jim?" Her voice was light, casual, as if she were returning from a simple errand. "I'm home." The door clicked shut. The light flicked on. I turned my head. She stood there, looking exactly the same. The same blue dress draped over her body. The same perfectly styled dark hair. Her posture relaxed. Her expression composed. Her wedding ring still in place. Nothing had changed. As if she hadn't just spent the entire night wrapped up with another man. This doesn't make sense. There should be something, a hesitation, a flicker of guilt, some trace of shame. But there was nothing. She smiled gently. "It's just me, the same me as always." She knew exactly what was going through my mind. "Nothing's different, Jim. I love you, just like I did yesterday." My voice was hollow. I wish I could say the same. For the first time, something in her expression wavered. "Jim," she said, her voice soft, coaxing, like she could undo the damage with the right tone. I didn't move. I simply pointed toward the bedroom. "Go shower." She hesitated, lips parting like she wanted to argue, but I didn't lower my hand. After a beat, she sighed and turned, disappearing down the hall. The sound of running water filled the silence. When she returned, hair damp, she smoothed a towel over her arms. "Where are my clothes from last night?" I didn't look at her. "Probably still at the hotel where you left them." Her brow furrowed. "You didn't bring them home?" "No." For a split second, she almost scolded me, almost demanded why I hadn't handled it. But she caught herself, realized how absurd that would sound. Instead, she sat down, quiet. "Why did you do it?" She exhaled slowly, folding her hands together. "It was Marc Lavalier." Her voice had an airy, distant quality, like she was reliving the moment. "He's rich, famous, he could have any woman in the room, and last night, when he asked me to dance, I felt special. She wasn't even looking at me anymore. She was somewhere else, lost in the memory, glowing from it. And in that moment, I knew. This marriage was already dead. She would hold on to that night forever. That fleeting moment of being desired, of being chosen. It meant more to her than any moment she had ever spent with me. "Do you love him?" She blinked, snapping back to reality. "No, of course not. It wasn't about that. It was just a moment. It was just Zex." "I love you, Jim." I shook my head, voice cold. "You and I have very different ideas about love." Linda's eyes flickered with disbelief, as if I were the one being unreasonable. In her mind, I was overreacting. She had fed her ego at my expense, yet she expected me to just accept it. "I came back to you because I love you, Jim," she said, her voice firm, as if stating a fact. I leaned back in my chair, watching her carefully. "If Mark had asked you to stay, to be with him as his girlfriend or even his wife, would you still be here right now?" She hesitated. It was barely a pause, but I caught it. Then, as if realizing her mistake, she straightened and forced a smile. "Of course," she answered quickly. "I love you, Jim." I didn't let it slide. "You hesitated." Her forced smile wavered just for a second. "That hesitation says everything," I continued, my voice calm but unrelenting. "If he had wanted you, you would have stayed." Linda's expression tightened. "It was just one night," she snapped. "It didn't mean anything. This conversation is over." I let out a slow breath, rubbing my temples. "I need time to think. Pack a bag for you and the kids. Stay at your parents' place for the week." Her eyes widened. "Jim, wait!" I cut her off, my tone firm. "The discussion is over, Linda. If you try to push this right now, you're not going to like the outcome." Something in my voice must have warned her not to argue. She swallowed hard, nodded slightly, then turned and left the room. Within the hour, she had packed a bag, gathered the kids, and driven off without another word. As soon as the car disappeared down the street, I got to work. Seeing her stand there in that same blue dress, looking completely unchanged, had flipped a switch inside me. I refused to sit around and let things return to normal. If I was going to get through this, I had to take control. I grabbed my phone and called my boss. "I need 2 weeks off," I said without preamble. After getting my leave approved, I rented a truck and drove straight to the hardware store. I loaded up on wood, drywall, paint, and 2 exterior doors. Then I started tearing the house apart. First, I removed the front door and the surrounding windows, widening the entryway. Then I installed two separate doors, one brand new, the other the original. I built a wall straight down the center of the house, splitting it into two independent living spaces. The back entrance was adjusted as well, with a second door leading to the left side where the new kitchen would be. My home office became a third bedroom on my side, while the dining room turned into a third bedroom for Linda's. When I finished, the house was practically a duplex, except for the detached garage, which still technically fell on Linda's side. That, however, was easy to fix. I changed the locks, reset the security code, and made sure I was the only one with access. Then I built a fence in the backyard, dividing it evenly. Now I had my own space. For the next few days, I called the kids daily, keeping my updates vague. Just working on the house, I told them. Linda, on the other hand, kept texting me, asking if we could talk. I ignored every message. After a few days, I picked up my phone and dialed Samantha's number. She answered on the first ring, her tone teasing. "I was starting to think you forgot about me." I smiled. "Hard to forget someone like you," she laughed softly. "Are you finally calling to ask me on a date?" "No," she gasped. "Excuse me," I smirked. "I wasn't thinking about a date. I was thinking about a weekend away, just the two of us." A pause. Then her voice took on a new level of excitement. "Are you serious?" "Yeah." "Where?" "The Bahamas." She let out an incredulous laugh. "You're joking." "Not at all. Can you leave this weekend? Thursday through Tuesday?" "Yes, absolutely, yes." "Good. Just bring your passport and your phone. We'll buy everything else when we get there." We talked a little longer, making loose plans. After I hung up, I immediately booked the flights and hotel. It wasn't cheap, but I didn't care. If Linda wanted to divorce me, she'd get half our savings anyway. In a way, she was funding my trip with Samantha. The thought made me smirk. Just in case, I moved our savings into a private account, changed my direct deposit settings, and ensured I had complete control over my finances. For the next few days, I worked around the clock, installing walls, painting, and finalizing the division of the house. By Wednesday, Linda's side was fully walled off and freshly painted. I hadn't yet separated the utilities, but for now, we still shared gas and electricity, which meant she couldn't cut mine off. That night, I called her. "Bring the kids home in the morning." By Thursday, my side of the house was locked up, and I sat on the porch waiting. When Linda pulled into the driveway, she and the kids stepped out, their faces frozen in shock as they took in the changes. Emma was the first to break the silence. "Dad, what did you do?" I gestured toward the house. "Turned it into a duplex. Do you like it?" All three of them just stared at me. "You're joking, right?" Tommy finally asked. I shrugged. "Relax, your rooms are already set up." Still speechless, they followed me inside as I walked them through their new living space. Linda remained quiet as she carried their bags upstairs. Tommy frowned as he took in the smaller living room. "Dad, this side feels tiny." "You won't even notice after a while," I assured him. "Besides, I've got plans. I'll be building a garage on this side soon. And once that's done, I'm putting in a pool and a jacuzzi." That caught their interest. Emma and Tommy exchanged glances, the idea settling in. Linda turned to the kids. "Go unpack," she instructed. She glanced at me as if waiting for an opening to talk, but I didn't acknowledge her. Instead, I followed the kids to their rooms, making sure they had everything they needed. Once they were settled, I pulled out the sandwiches I had picked up earlier, setting them on the kitchen table. As we ate, Emma studied me carefully. "Dad, what's really going on?" But I could tell she was watching Linda's reaction more than mine. After spending the past week with their mother, the kids had clearly picked up on something. Linda had likely dodged their questions, and now they were searching for answers. I took a bite of my sandwich and smiled. "Oh, just preparing for the future. Things won't stay the same forever, so I'm making sure I'm ready." Emma's eyes narrowed slightly. "Maybe you could have talked to us before making a huge change?" I grinned and turned to Linda. "Actually, it was your mom's idea. She decided she needed something different." Linda's eyes widened, clearly caught off guard. Emma turned to her, frustration written all over her face. "Mom, why would you make such a huge decision without even talking to us first?" Tommy crossed his arms, his tone sharp. "Yeah, Mom. Don't we get a say in this?" Linda hesitated, looking completely thrown off. "This is all just a misunderstanding," she insisted, her voice unsteady. "Your father completely misread the situation." I leaned back, studying her with feigned sympathy. "I don't know, Linda. You seemed pretty certain about what you wanted that night. So certain, in fact, that I realized there was no turning back. Her face twisted as she struggled to maintain her composure. For a second, I thought she might break down. Instead, she turned and walked out without another word. Tommy let out a sigh. "What's up with Mom? She keeps crying over everything." I simply shrugged. "Maybe you should ask her." Emma opened her mouth like she wanted to push for more, but I didn't give her the chance. I grabbed my keys and stood up. "I'll be out of town for a few days. I won't be available during the day, but I'll call you both every night." I kissed them each on the head before heading for the door. As I left, I wondered if they noticed I hadn't said a single word to their mother. I picked up Samantha from her apartment and we hit the road. That weekend was one of the best experiences of my life. We flew first class, stayed at a luxury resort, and indulged in everything the Bahamas had to offer. Gorgeous beaches, incredible food, and endless drinks. Samantha was beyond grateful, and she found plenty of ways to show me just how much she appreciated it. By the time we returned, both of us were sun-kissed, completely relaxed, and more in sync than ever. I knew every inch of her body now, and she knew exactly how to make me forget the past. On Tuesday, I pulled up in front of her apartment. She leaned over, kissing me deeply before pulling away with a soft smile. "Stay the night," she whispered, her fingers trailing over my arm. I chuckled. "Tempting, but I've got a few things to take care of first. And you have class tomorrow," she pouted. "At least call me before you go to bed. I want to hear your voice." I kissed her again and murmured, "With pleasure." As I drove home, a grin tugged at my lips. The night before, Samantha had admitted that she could see herself falling in love with someone like me. That thought lingered as I turned onto my street. I spotted Linda's car parked in her driveway, but I pulled up in front of my half of the house, making sure to keep my distance. I had barely started unpacking when a knock sounded at my door. I opened it to find Linda standing there. "You're back," she said quietly. "Yeah," I replied simply. "Can we talk?" "Sure," she hesitated. "Can I come in?" I shook my head. "No, you're not allowed on my side." She blinked in surprise. "What?" I leaned against the doorframe. "This is my space. You're not welcome here. Ever." Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to argue, but she said nothing. After a moment, she turned and walked back to her side of the house, her shoulders stiff. The reality of our separation had finally sunk in. We sat across from each other at her kitchen table. She let out a slow breath, eyes searching mine. "Jim, I love you. I just want things to go back to how they were." "That's not going to happen," her brow furrowed. "Why?" I met her gaze evenly. "Because you did something that permanently changed the way I feel about you." She shook her head. "But it shouldn't be like this." I exhaled, my patience thinning. "Actually, this is exactly how it should be. You made a choice, and nothing you say is going to undo it." "I love you, Jim," she pleaded. I let out a short, humorless laugh, gathering my thoughts. "Let's imagine we were just dating. We're out with friends, and then you suddenly leave with another guy. You spend the entire night and morning with him in his bed. If that had happened on our first date, do you think there would have been a second?" Linda swallowed hard. "But Jim, it was Mark." "I don't care who it was," I cut in. "You picked someone else over me." Her voice rose in frustration. "I keep telling you, I didn't choose Mark over you." I arched a brow. "So you didn't sneak out the back of the club? You didn't go home with him? It was just one night," she snapped. I let out a slow breath, shaking my head. "You've had years to show me what I meant to you, but the moment someone famous gave you attention, I became nothing." I leaned back in my chair. "So tell me, should I be keeping you away from athletes, actors, politicians? There's a marathon happening downtown this weekend. Are you planning to sleep with the winner?" Linda's expression hardened. "That's not fair." I fixed my gaze on her, my tone even. "Oh, so now you want fairness? Now you want a chance to justify what you did? A chance to talk me out of my anger? To make me feel guilty for being hurt? To convince me I should prioritize our family over my own pain? I seem to be the only one in this relationship who's ever been expected to be fair." Her expression crumbled. She reached for my hand hesitantly. I let her take it, watching as a glimmer of hope flickered in her eyes. I didn't look away as I said, "It's too late, Linda." Her grip tightened. "Too late?" I nodded. "Yeah, too late." Her breath hitched, her eyes glistening. "You found someone else." A slow smile tugged at my lips. "You already know who it is. Dee and your friends must have told you." The redhead I danced with that night. The one who held on to me while you were sneaking out the back with Mark. The woman who took your place on the anniversary you threw away. Linda inhaled sharply, her face paling. She had seen the photos. Dee must have sent them to her. Pictures of Samantha and me, locked in an intimate dance, her arms wrapped around me. Her voice was unsteady, but I heard the bitterness beneath it. Is this your way of getting back at me? Parading some 24-year-old in front of me just to hurt me? I smirked. Actually, 21. I leaned forward slightly, dropping my next words like a bomb. I just spent 4 days with her in the Bahamas. You know that dream trip you and I always talked about? It was even better than I imagined. Linda's face twisted with anger, but I could also see the hurt beneath it. I didn't care. For the first time in a long time, I was truly happy. Linda's eyes burned with fury as she processed my words. I could see the anger tightening her jaw, but it wasn't just my words that had struck a nerve. It was the smirk I couldn't quite keep off my face. I inhaled deeply, reminding myself to stay composed, to keep my emotions in check for the sake of the kids. Forcing my expression to neutralize, I met her gaze head-on. She parted her lips, raising a hand as if she were about to launch into a tirade, one filled with sharp words meant to wound, but then she hesitated. Her expression shifted as the realization dawned on her. I already knew exactly what she was going to say. Every excuse, every attempt to justify herself, every desperate plea, it was all predictable. Slowly, she exhaled, closing her mouth and placing her hands on the table. Silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken words. I could see the frustration in her eyes. She wanted to lash out, to scold me, to regain control of the conversation, of our marriage, of me. But she couldn't. Not anymore. For years, she had held power over me through love and trust, but she had shattered both in a single night. She was beginning to understand that now. I could almost see the gears turning in her mind. When she chose to leave with Mark, she must have thought it was a fleeting indulgence, a momentary escape she could justify later. She had assumed there was enough goodwill between us to cover the damage. What she hadn't realized was that she hadn't just spent a little. She had gambled everything. And she had lost. Her fingers tightened around each other as she stared at her hands. After a long pause, she finally whispered, "It doesn't matter. I love you." I shook my head. "And you still think that should mean something to me, don't you?" Her eyes snapped up to mine. "Why do you believe your love should hold any weight after what you did?" I asked, my tone even. "Clearly, my love for you didn't mean enough to stop you, so why should I value yours?" Her voice was almost childlike in its desperation. "I don't want to lose you." "Then maybe you should have thought about that before you broke my trust," I said, calm but firm. "You took me for granted, Linda, and now you don't deserve me." Her brow furrowed, as if she couldn't quite process the words. I stood up. "I'm heading back to my side of the house. I still have work to do. I'll be here for dinner with the kids, but until then, don't bother me." I turned and walked away. She didn't stop me. As I closed the door behind me, I heard her start to cry. It hurt to leave her like that. Every instinct I had screamed at me to turn back, to comfort her, to hold her like I used to. But I couldn't. The woman I had loved, the partner I had trusted, was gone. What remained was just a painful reminder of what she had thrown away. Before dinner, I brought the kids over to my side of the house. I showed them the layout I had planned for my new kitchen, explaining how I intended to cut out the back wall and install floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the backyard. Their eyes drifted to the fence, dividing the yard in half. I could see the realization sinking in. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't just some project Dad was working on. This was home. I led them to their rooms. Tommy frowned as he looked around. "Why do I have 2 bedrooms?" "Because this is my home," I explained. "And that side is your mother's." Emma and Tommy exchanged uneasy glances before Emma hesitated and asked, "Are you and Mom getting a divorce?" Tommy added, "She won't tell us anything, no matter how many times we ask." I sighed. "No, we're just separated. I didn't want to be a weekend dad, so I split the house. You two can stay wherever you want." Before they could say more, Linda's voice called from the doorway. "Dinner's ready?" We ate in near silence. Linda looked tense, her gaze flickering between me and the kids, realizing they had learned more than she had wanted them to. Then Tommy, without hesitation, blurted out, "I'm moving in with Dad when my room's finished." Linda's fork slipped from her fingers, clattering onto her plate. Her shocked expression told me she hadn't expected that. Tommy continued, his voice just a little too loud. Dad said you two are splitting up. We're not, Linda said quickly. It's just a misunderstanding. We haven't finished talking about it. Emma suddenly slammed her hand on the table, her voice shaking. Who changed? She demanded. I want to know. Silence filled the room. Emma and Tommy looked between the two of us, waiting. I said nothing. Instead, I turned my gaze to Linda. She dropped her eyes to her plate. When the tears finally started slipping down her cheeks, the kids got their answer. I sighed and pushed my chair back. Your mother is exhausted. She needs to rest. I stood and helped Linda to her feet. She didn't resist as I guided her toward the bedroom. Once inside, I undressed her like a child, tucking her into bed, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead like I had when the kids were little. I switched off the light and closed the door behind me, and I felt nothing. If anything, the way I looked at Linda now was the same way I would look at a grown child who had done something unforgivable, someone I would always care for, but who could never be part of my life the same way again. I checked in on Tommy first. He was lying in bed, scrolling through his phone. You want to talk? I asked. He shrugged. Not really. I nodded, giving him space, and moved on to Emma's room. She was curled up on her bed, her arms wrapped around her knees, silent tears streaking her face. Why did she do this, Dad? She whispered. You'll have to ask her, I said gently. She sniffled, her voice raw. Can't you just forgive her? If I did, I'd never be able to forgive myself. She let out a heavy sigh. I know, but I just want our family to stay together. We are together, I said softly. I just won't be in the same room as your mother anymore. I hugged her, whispered that I loved her, and left for my side of the house. This became our routine. I left for work before the kids woke up, so their mornings didn't change. Linda and I still split driving duties for their activities. We still sat down for family dinners in her half of the house. But the cracks were visible. Linda tried to bring up our relationship at least once a week, attempting to talk, to reason, to reach for something that wasn't there anymore. But I never entertained the conversation. There was nothing left to say. At school events, I always kept my distance from Linda. If she tried to move closer, I would casually excuse myself and slip away, only to return to a different seat. I was never alone for long. Single and divorced women we knew always seemed to find their way next to me. And they were always curious. The question was inevitable. I always gave the same answer. We're separated. Over the next few months, I completely revamped my side of the house. I upgraded everything: new clothes, high-end kitchen appliances, sleek cabinets, modern furniture. I turned it into the ultimate bachelor's retreat, complete with a massive flat-screen TV and a top-of-the-line sound system. Then I bought a convertible. The moment Linda spotted it, she couldn't hold back. Jim, can we even afford this? That car must have cost a fortune. I shrugged. My last car was 8 years older than yours. I needed a new one. I met her gaze evenly. You always replaced your car twice as often as I did. I just used those skipped years to upgrade. Her eyes darted toward the house. And all the new furniture? I figured I was being generous by not making you part with anything you were attached to, I said simply. Besides, I never liked your taste in furniture anyway. Her brows knitted together. You never said anything before. Because I wanted you to be happy, I replied. And honestly, it never really mattered to me. She didn't have a response to that. Don't worry, I continued. The house is fully paid off. Once the kids move out, I'll rent my half for extra income. I'm set. Linda's expression shifted. Suddenly, she gave me that look, the sultry smile that had always meant someone's getting lucky tonight. She stepped closer, resting a hand on my shoulder and squeezing lightly. I'm not complaining, she said smoothly. I like the new car. You've been working out. You look good in those clothes. I smiled. Thanks. Tommy and Emma helped me pick out the car. I paused for effect. Samantha helped with the furniture and my wardrobe. We have really similar taste. Linda's smile faltered and her hand dropped from my shoulder as soon as I said Samantha's name. Oh, she said stiffly, trying to sound indifferent. I was just wondering. Without another word, she turned and walked away. I hadn't meant to rub Samantha in Linda's face, but the truth was she was becoming a major part of my life. And I realized something. I thought about her constantly, far more than I thought about Linda or her feelings. At first, Samantha only stayed over a few nights a week, but gradually she was there more often than not. Tommy had already moved into my side of the house, claiming the master bedroom for himself, and even Emma, who initially spent most of her time with Linda, started hanging out with Samantha more and more. It was like she had found the big sister she never had. Eventually, Samantha was spending weekends and most weeknights with me. The only time Linda pushed back was when I invited Samantha to our usual family dinner. She remained polite, but made it clear she didn't want this to become a routine. The next morning, as I was heading out for work, Linda stopped me at the door. "Jim," she began carefully, "I appreciate that we can still talk, but I'd rather you not bring your girlfriend to family dinners. That's supposed to be time for us and the kids." I smiled. "That's great. In the future, I won't attend dinner when Samantha isn't invited, but the kids will always have an open invitation to eat with me and Samantha whenever they like." Her jaw tightened. "That's not fair, Jim. This is the only time we get to be together as a family." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, so we're talking about fairness now, Linda?" She hesitated before sighing. "Look, I get that Samantha is important to you. I can see that. But I don't think it's fair to force her into our family time." I nodded. "And I don't think it's fair to exclude her. She gets along great with the kids. If you want her out, that means you're pushing me out too." "Jim," I tilted my head, "you've always prided yourself on being honest, right? You said honesty was what justified your choices. My feelings were never the priority." My tone sharpened. "You were probably thinking you were being honest when you snuck out the back of that club with Marc Lavalier." Linda flinched. Even though we no longer shared a home, it was clear she still thought she had some level of control over me. Some sort of leverage beyond the kids. "You threw away honor and fairness that night," I continued, voice steady. "So if you don't like it, the truly fair thing would be for me to host all future dinners at my place. You're welcome to join. Samantha's a great cook and she enjoys it." Tears welled in Linda's eyes. "I'm sorry I brought it up. Samantha is welcome to dinner anytime she wants." Once the pool and hot tub were finished, Tommy took full advantage of them, especially when Samantha's friends, Kim, Christy, and Susan, started coming over. They turned it into a game, shamelessly flirting with him, each competing to see who could make him blush the most. At first, it was all just harmless teasing. Then the swimsuits started getting smaller. Christy, though, had some limitations. Her bust size made it nearly impossible to wear anything too revealing unless she wanted a wardrobe malfunction. But in the end, she won. One afternoon, she kissed Tommy in the pool, pressing herself against him. Poor kid stayed in the water for a solid 10 minutes afterward, despite how cold it was. Still, Tommy came out as the real winner. His confidence skyrocketed, and soon enough, he had a girlfriend at school. Once Kim, Christy, and Susan met her, they immediately dropped the flirting and instead treated the girl like she had won the lottery. Samantha had some great friends. As for Linda, she was never allowed in my side of the house. I refused to let her interfere with my relationship with Samantha. But, as life tends to do, things shifted. Years later, Samantha graduated and we parted ways. I saw it coming before she ever said a word. We were at Susan's wedding, spending the entire weekend together. I met her family, we danced, laughed, and for a while, everything felt perfect. But something had changed. I could sense it in the way she looked at me when she thought I wasn't paying attention. Despite how much we enjoyed being together, the difference in our ages was beginning to weigh on her. It didn't bother me. I was content, happy with where we were. But for Samantha, it was different. She never outright said it, but I could tell she was starting to feel like I had already lived the part of my life she was just beginning. One evening, as we were watching the sunset, she casually mentioned she was thinking about moving. That's when I asked her to marry me. She hesitated, then gave me a sad smile. "Jim, I'm honored that you asked, but I need to figure out who I am first. I have so much ahead of me, and I don't want to make a choice I might regret later." I nodded. "I want to start a new family." She bit her lip, her expression conflicted. I knew she cared about me deeply, but I also knew what was holding her back. I was the right person, just at the wrong time in her life. It was frustrating. Just like Linda, she was letting go of a good man, convinced that time was on her side, that she had unlimited choices ahead of her. I tried to be subtle, to help her understand that people who build endless lists of expectations often find themselves alone. Trust is the foundation of any strong relationship, I told her. But sometimes, I feel like I'm being penalized for my own success. Like you think men like me are everywhere." She frowned. I would never be so naive. I nodded, already knowing where this would lead. In the end, I told her, "I understand. If you ever change your mind, I'll always be here. Maybe someday, when age doesn't seem as important, our paths will cross again." I never regretted a single moment with Samantha. At least she had the courage to be honest with me, unlike Linda, who had snuck out the back door without a word. As for Linda's friends, the people I once considered my own, I ran into them occasionally. Every time they tried to convince me to reconcile with Linda, I always gave the same response. "That's a great argument. Now tell me, how did you feel when your spouse cheated on you?" Because the truth was, I had seen them that night. They weren't just complicit in what happened, they encouraged it. And karma has a way of settling scores. A few months later, word spread that the wives had started going to a different club, the same one Marc Lavalier frequented. This time, however, they didn't tell their husbands. One of Dave's co-workers happened to be there one night. He saw Dee dancing with Mark. About an hour later, Mark vanished, and shortly after, the group of women left. The co-worker mentioned it in passing at work, and eventually it got back to Dave. When Dave confronted Dee, she denied everything. So did the rest of the wives. Then the co-worker sent Dave a photo he had taken with his girlfriend that night. In the background, clear as day, was Mark sitting at a table full of married women. Cornered, they finally admitted they had been at the club, but they swore that none of them had gone home with Mark. Of course, their stories didn't line up, and eventually the truth unraveled. But instead of revealing who had left with him, they all refused to betray each other. Unfortunately for them, by the time they finally admitted it had been Dee, it was too late. Too many lies. Too much broken trust. When the husbands finally sat down together and compared stories, Dave summed it up perfectly. They covered for each other for too long. They lied too easily. How do we know this was the first time? And how do we know it won't happen again? Every one of those men had seen their wives' faces light up when Mark had approached our table that night. They had all watched as their wives cheered Linda on, as if she had won some sort of prize. At first, no one thought much of it. Some even joked that their wives had been more enthusiastic in bed after hearing about Linda's night with Mark. Then, a couple of months later, one husband made an offhand comment about how much he hated sleeping on silk sheets. Another man, surprised, admitted that his wife had also recently replaced their sheets with white silk. Over the next few weeks, 2 more husbands made the same discovery. 4 beds, 4 wives, 4 brand new sets of white silk sheets. After Dee's night with Mark, the husbands started to notice a shift in their marriages, a lingering discomfort, a feeling they couldn't shake, that their wives weren't just fantasizing about their time with Mark, but reliving it. Within a year, all 4 couples had filed for divorce. I learned about all of this through Dave. He was the first to leave his wife. When he told me the reason, he also apologized. One by one, each husband came to me with the same regret. "If I had stood up for you that night," they all admitted in their own way, "maybe I would have sent a different message to my wife. Maybe I wouldn't be in this situation now." As for Marc Lavalier, his habit of preying on married women finally caught up with him. No one knows exactly who did it, but one night, as he was leaving a club with yet another married woman, a masked man ambushed him. They tasered him first. Then, while he was still disoriented, they shattered his groin with a bat. Mark collapsed, screaming. Then his attacker methodically broke both of his kneecaps. There was security footage, but the assailant was never caught. There were just too many men with a motive. Mark never walked again. The last time Linda and I talked about our past was the day Emma left for college. By then, we were long divorced. I had moved into a beachfront condo, renting out my half of the house. As Emma pulled out of the driveway, Linda turned to me, hesitant. "Jim, can we talk?" I let out a slow breath. "Sure." She bit her lip, as if trying to find the right words. "I still love you," she finally admitted. "I made a terrible mistake, and I regret it every day. Since that night, I haven't dated. I haven't even looked at another man." She searched my face, looking for any sign of hope. "I know you haven't had a serious relationship since Samantha," she continued. "I was wondering if maybe you'd consider moving back in, just to see if we can make this work again." She reached up, her fingers trembling as she unclasped the delicate chain from around her neck. At the end of it, dangling slightly in the dim light, was my wedding ring, the very same one I had handed to Dee the night Linda walked out of my life. Holding it out to me, her eyes brimmed with something close to desperation. I didn't move. I didn't reach for it. You still don't get it, do you, Linda? She swallowed, her throat tightening. I do, Jim. I swear I do. That night, I was reckless. I thought I was testing your love, but in reality, it was my own love being tested, and I failed. Her voice dropped to a whisper. But I do love you. I exhaled slowly, shaking my head. No. You loved the life we built. You loved what we represented. You loved the perfect home, the stable marriage, the well-behaved children. You loved that I treated you with respect, that I never controlled you, that I always made your happiness a priority. She stood there, frozen, the necklace still extended between us. You loved the way our closeness never faded, even after all those years. You loved the security I gave you, the freedom to chase whatever dreams you wanted without fear. But above all, I locked eyes with her. You loved that I trusted you completely, without question, without hesitation. Her fingers clenched around the necklace, her knuckles turning white. And now, I continued, my voice unwavering, you love me more than ever, because now you understand that no one will ever love you the way I once did. No one will ever cherish you the way I did. Her breath hitched, and for a fleeting second, I thought she might collapse under the weight of it all. But you took it for granted, and now it's gone. Her hands trembled. I can't be around you anymore, I said, my words final. I will never again put myself in a position where you could do to me what you did that night. Tears gathered in her eyes. How many times do I have to say I regret it? This was never about Mark, Linda. A single tear slipped down her cheek. You thought you were special when Mark chose you. You felt lucky, didn't you? Confusion flickered across her face. But here's the thing, I said, my voice steady. I was lucky too. She frowned slightly as if trying to make sense of my words. Because at my lowest moment, when your friends tried to convince me I was foolish for being hurt, I realized something important. I let the pause stretch between us. We were a great couple, but not because of you. Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to argue, but no words came. It was because of me. She inhaled sharply, shaking her head in disbelief. You left because my love was strong, not yours. My love would never have even entertained doing what you did. My love was what made us special. She pressed a shaking hand to her lips, her breath unsteady. And as I sat there that night, drowning in my anger and confusion, I happened to look across the room. A small, genuine smile tugged at the corner of my lips. I saw Samantha sitting there. She looked sad too. But when she noticed me watching, she smiled. Linda flinched at the mention of her. That smile reminded me of something I had forgotten in the chaos of it all, I said. That I was still me. That I was still capable of loving, of being wanted, of pouring my devotion into something, someone who actually deserved it. Tears streamed down Linda's face, unchecked. You opened my eyes that night, Linda. You freed me. I turned without another word, walking toward my car. As I slid into my convertible, I didn't look back. The engine purred to life, and as I pulled onto the road, I realized something. I was smiling. I was eager to get home. Samantha had quit her job last week and moved in with me. Since then, she had been doing an excellent job, proving that she would always need me in her life. Trust, it's a beautiful thing.